All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly absolutely crucial piece of analysis from Clutis Partners. It's called the platform trap. Now, if you've been anywhere near tech, IT, or business leadership, you've probably felt this underlying tension for years, right? That creeping feeling that your organization is just slowly losing control of its own technology stack. Well, today we are dragging a 30-year invisible tech trap right out into the open. It's been quietly draining strategic freedom from organizations for decades. But here's the incredibly good news. The explosion of AI, it's finally forcing us to wake up, redraw the boundaries, and ultimately reclaim our architectural sovereignty.
So here's our game plan for today. We're going to cover the structural platform trap, ending the high SaaS era, and then look at the closing intelligence trap. After that, we'll see why small markets set the path, how we're restoring enterprise architecture, and why the ultimate goal is sovereignty. Think of this as your manifesto for escaping vendor lock-in.
All right, let's jump right into part one, the structural platform trap.
Okay, let's dive into this. The friction you constantly feel between buyers, software vendors, and system integrators, that's not a glitch, and it certainly wasn't just created by AI over the last year. No, this is a structural 30-year-old issue. Basically, every enterprise software market is governed by this totally misaligned, uncomfortable triangle. You've got the vendor, whose main goal is retention, creating what we call platform gravity. Then you have the buyer, who wants freedom but suffers from optionality decay. And the system integrator? Well, they're just sitting comfortably in the middle, monetizing all that complexity. Let's break down exactly how this happens, starting with the vendors.
So this brings us to platform gravity. Look, a vendor's entire commercial model relies on retention, right? Every single time they acquire a new product, roll out a new module, or push for a deeper integration, they are completely rationally deploying capital to make sure that leaving their platform is incredibly painful for you. They like to call it expanding value, but a sophisticated buyer needs to recognize it for what it actually is. They are tightening the trap. And the crazy thing is, both of those things are true at the exact same time.
But hey, we can't just point the finger at vendors here. The sad truth? Buyers build this trap themselves through something called optionality decay. Your stated goal is almost always optionality. You know, the freedom to leave whenever you want. But every single time you customize a workflow, or every time you train a new team member on one highly specific interface, you are actively eroding your own exit options. By the time a CIO is finally fed up with a vendor, the accumulated cost of actually migrating away is just way too high. You're completely stuck. Moving on to part two, ending the high SaaS era.
For about a decade now, the high SaaS era meant organizations basically outsourced their architecture to massive vendor ecosystems. But guess what? That era is ending. To really get why, we need to look back a bit. In the 1990s, companies like IBM, Sun, and DEC sold proprietary hardware at just insane margins because it was deeply defensible. But then, standard PC architecture and Intel totally commoditized that hardware layer, and all the real value shifted up to software. We're seeing that exact same dynamic play out today. Enterprise application software is getting commoditized, and all the real value is moving a layer up to the AI intelligence layer.
So here is the absolute game changer. For 30 years, when a frustrated buyer threatened a massive software vendor by saying, "Hey, give us a discount or we'll just build it ourselves," the vendor practically laughed. It was an empty threat. Platform gravity was just way too strong. But AI changed this one critical variable. Today, if a CFO says they might build an internal alternative using AI and modern data layers, it's actually a credible threat. And that newly credible threat? It's completely repricing a market that was built entirely on the assumption of captive buyers. But don't pop the champagne just yet.
Which brings us to part three, the closing intelligence trap.
Just because the old SaaS trap is breaking doesn't mean we're out of the woods. In fact, we're facing a massive illusion of safety right now. Now, what's really interesting here is that a lot of organizations think that just because they use a diverse set of AI models, a little OpenAI here, some Anthropic over there, that they've achieved architectural independence. They absolutely haven't. Running 3 different model vendors on a single hyperscaler's infrastructure tied to one specific embedding database, that is still a massive single dependency. Model diversity does not equal architectural independence. The real lock-in is forming at the data layer, the agent framework layer, and the infrastructure layer, not the model layer. The model is actually the most substitutable, least dangerous component in the whole stack.
And guys, we do not have much time here. That SaaS trap we were just talking about, that took a decade to fully form. The intelligence trap is forming at lightning speed. literally one layer above the SaaS relationships that organizations are only just now figuring out how to govern. Think about it. Organizational knowledge encoded in fine-tuned models and embedding databases might be practically irreversible at scale. The massive capital barrier removes the exit threat that made SaaS renegotiation possible in the first place. If you don't establish governance over this right now, you are going to be permanently locked in. The window to get ahead of this before the trap snaps shut is only 2 to 3 years, not a decade.
All right, part 4. Small markets set the path.
If you want to know how we actually escape this trap, you have to look away from the massive enterprise incumbents, and this brilliantly illustrates what we call the hobbyist principle. If you want to understand what enterprise software looks like in 25 years, look at where hobbyists are building today. The personal computer came from the Homebrew Computer Club. Linux was dismissed as a total toy right before it ran the entire internet. Why? Because hobbyists operate completely unconstrained by platform gravity. They don't have legacy systems or massive vendor ecosystems dragging them down. The people building with AI agents and open APIs today are out there experimenting with the exact architectures that are going to define the enterprise pipeline in a decade.
This leads us to part 5, restoring enterprise architecture. So, what exactly do we do today? To fight back against these traps, organizations have to bring the enterprise architect back to a position of true strategic power. Look, the high SaaS era didn't make the enterprise architect irrelevant. It just made architectural decisions totally invisible by outsourcing them to vendors and SIs. But AI has made the cost of that invisible visible again. Two massive forces are actually restoring this role right now. First, you have external compliance pressure, stuff like navigating new AI regulations, data sovereignty laws, and intense audits. Second, you have internal sovereignty urgency, the absolute need to escape optionality decay before that intelligence trap closes on you. The enterprise architect is suddenly the most important person in the room again. They provide compliance governance to answer the regulator and sovereignty governance to answer the board. It's the mandate the role was always designed for.
Finally, part 6. The goal is sovereignty.
The ultimate objective here isn't just to stubbornly balance 3 different vendors against each other. The CIO's job is not to just maintain equilibrium between competing tech forces. The job is to ensure the organization retains the ability to make tech decisions based on strategic intent, rather than just accumulated dependency. The goal is true architectural sovereignty. To get there, especially for large institutions, you need a 3-horizon remediation program. Step 1 is visibility, knowing exactly where your dependencies are forming and understanding the true cost of exit. Step 2 is governance, creating explicit board-level rules before a platform choice becomes a permanent constraint. And step 3 is sovereignty at defined scope, ensuring the organization actually implements that freedom across its operations.
Let's think about how this actually changes the architecture in practice. In the old model, intelligence was deeply embedded right inside the vendor's proprietary platform. Workflows were hard-coded. But in the new model, intelligence is extracted and sits above the platform. Systems of record just become interchangeable utilities. Integration happens through open APIs, like the Model Context Protocol, and workflows are executed by entirely vendor-agnostic AI agents. If you suddenly don't like the underlying CRM or ERP anymore, boom, you just swap it out without losing your company's core intelligence. That is what true sovereignty looks like. We're going to wrap up this explainer with a question that you should absolutely take back to your own leadership teams today. What is the actual quantified exit cost of your most critical platform? And who explicitly owns the decision to deepen that dependency? Seriously, if you can't answer that right now, the trap is already closing. The time to map your dependencies, practice optionality governance, and reclaim your architecture is today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it gave you a powerful new framework for thinking about your entire tech stack.